Hey, I'm Randy, and you're watching The Cheap Audio Man. Here at The Cheap Audio Man, we talk about high-value, hi-fi home theater and headphone equipment. And today, we're going to talk about my favorite EQ settings. 6 of them, to be exact. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about my favorite EQ settings. Big shout out to today's sponsor, the WiiM Mini Streamer. If you watch any of my videos, you know I'm a big fan of the WiiM Mini because it's $80 or $90. Apple AirPlay 2, Bluetooth, fully functioning streaming platform with gapless playback on Amazon Music, gapless playback on Tidal Music. There's a SoundCloud beta going on right now. 10-channel EQ. There's also a Tidal Core decoder beta going on for masters stuff. If you like masters or not, doesn't matter. And you'll get 88.2 or 96 kilohertz output. There is so much to like about this product at $80 or $90. It's insane. So I will link the WiiM Mini Streamer in the description and the pinned comment if you haven't looked at it and you're wanting to get into whole home distributed audio or just streaming. It's a no-brainer product. EQ. I'm a big proponent of EQ. I grew up with them in the 80s and 90s. I love them, not just because they made the sound different, because they had lights a lot of the time. I wish they would have lights still. I also love them because I didn't always have, or I never had the budget to get the greatest speakers on the planet. So I had to work with what I had, and I could get an EQ and kind of jazz up the speakers just the way I wanted them. Fast forward 30 years later to today, EQs have fallen out of fashion a little bit. However, there's still options out there, both digitally and in the analog domain. And today I'm going to share with you a few different, my favorite EQs for different settings. About 5 or 6 of them. Sometimes we can scratch that itch for a new speaker way cheaper with a $300 EQ or an $80 or $90 streamer. So all the pictures I'm going to show you are off of a 10-band EQ internal to the WiiM. I also have a Skit Lokius, and I'll kind of try to show you on there what it looks like, but having a somewhat of a graphical representation on a picture, probably going to be easier to kind of understand what I'm doing here. So my first EQ curve that I love to use, I call it the Cam W for wonderful. Actually, this is somewhat of a V curve. However, for me personally, I do it a little bit differently. V curve would indicate that you have the bass boosted and then the top end boosted and the mid range pulled down a little bit. I like to do a little bit different take on that. And these are not heavy handed adjustments. The picture that I'm going to show you is more exaggerated just to see the shape of the curve. But what I like to do is I'll bring up, in this example, on the WiiM, you have adjustments at 31, 64, 125, 250, 500, 1, 2K, 4K, 8K, 16K. So what I generally like to do is I'll bring the 31 Hertz, bring that up about 3 dB. 64 dB, it's going to be a little bit less, maybe around 2 dB. 125 is going to be even less, maybe 1 dB. Then at the 250, I'm going to start to bring that down a little bit, just dip a little bit below 0 dB. And then the 500 dB is going to be slightly higher than that. 1K, I'm going to leave alone. I'm going to leave that at 0 dB. And then I start to go back down again. So 2K, just slightly down. 4K, just slightly down. And then I'm going to come back up into 4K. Sometimes that's at 0. Sometimes it's still below 0. And then at 8K, we're definitely going to get above 0 dB, and then also 16K above 0 dB. So like a W. A couple of reasons I do this. One, generally speaking, I listen to bookshelves. Bookshelf speakers don't always pack the biggest punch when it comes to bass. So I like to fill in the low end of the speaker a little bit. On the top end, I like to fill in a little bit because, let's face it, I'm 46 years old. I grew up on a farm. I also served on submarines. My hearing, I got probably some loss in the upper frequencies. Just because we have hearing loss in the upper frequencies on a hearing test doesn't mean we still can't hear those frequencies. It's just we need a little bit of help. Some speakers compensate for that with their stock tuning. Other speakers do not. I would rather have the option to add in what I need instead of having a speaker telling me what you need when it comes to top end extension. So the areas where I really start to get interested in is 10K and 16K. My hearing starts to fall off around 14K, sometimes lower. So if I can boost that up a bit, it brings a lot more air in. The perception of detail makes me much happier. On the mid-range, I like to dip it right before 1K, but just a titch. To me, that cleans up the mid-range quite a bit. And then I also dip 2K. 2K for me is where some fatigue starts to happen. So I am almost always cutting 2K just a little bit, unless it's super scooped out on that specific speaker. And then 4K, I'm also dipping a little bit, but it's starting to rise back up because 4K for me is where a lot of sibilance happens. So that sh and that tss, tss. If I'm having sibilance issues, that 6K area, I pull that down. That is kind of my stock cam tuning. Of course, it depends on the speaker and what's going on. But a lot of times I'll start with that shape and then I'll adjust from there. Sometimes I don't need to. Most oftentimes I do. Because it's my preference. I want my music to sound the way I want it to sound. We don't always have the ability to buy exactly the right equipment to get things to sound exactly right for us without having any tone controls or EQ. Some speakers have a very lush, rich mid-range, like the Wharfedale Linton, which is one of my favorite speakers. A lot of speakers, especially in the more affordable category, don't have that just really yummy, caramelly, cheesy mid-range. Not cheesy in a bad way. Cheesy as in like melty cheesy. It's delicious. So what I like to do sometimes to warm up some voices, to bring a little bit of easy on Sunday morning type of a feel, is I will somewhat leave the bass alone. So 30 and 60 I leave alone. A little bit of dip at 125 before I get into the real adjustment. 250 and 500 hertz are going to be brought up a bit. And then 1K is actually going to be slightly brought down. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a couple of the frequencies right before 1K and just bringing them up. And you can curve it too, so it doesn't have to be like a shelf EQ. You can kind of curve it up and play around with it to just insert a little bit of warmth into the voices. After 1K, again, I'm bringing down 2K a little bit because that 1K to 2K pushes voices forward for me. I don't necessarily want them pushed forward, especially that 2K area. I like to bring it down a little bit because that's where the fatigue can set in for me. And then if I want, well, more exciting top end again, I kind of do the right half of the Cam W, but ultimately it's up to you. If you want to warm up voices though, just left of 1K. Start to play around with those frequencies. And you might want to drop 125 because what can happen is if you boost all of those, then mid-range can get a little bit veiled and muffled. If you drop that 125 right before you're going into 250, 500, it cleans it up a little bit. If you want more treble or your speaker's a little bit rolled off and you like to, it's pretty simple. You can leave everything flat and then just start boosting. I would start boosting at 4K. So 4K, I would go up maybe a dB, 8K, 2, 16K, 3 dB. I don't like to adjust really beyond 3 dB. One of the things though about boosting certain ranges is oftentimes you can get the same experience instead of boosting, just cutting right before. So if I want to really jazz up the top end, sometimes I cut 2K and 4K, and then the top end just kind of takes care of itself. If I want to increase vocal clarity, I'll cut 500, I'll cut 250 a little bit, and then it just brings the detail back into the voices, acoustic guitars, things like that. For treble, if something's rolled off or if you have hearing damage, really start to concentrate on that 4, 8, 10, 16K area. Don't go crazy with 4K though, because that can start to bring in some sibilance if the recording is sibilant and if your speakers or your electronics are sibilant as well. So 4, 6K, kind of control the sibilance there, but you know, want to bring that top end up. And again, you can do a shelf EQ, just boom, and then like that. I like to curve it up a little bit. So if you want more bass in a speaker, a traditional bass boost, and I'll show you a picture here, is just boosting 30 and then slowly coming back down to flat around 1K. However, most speakers, if you want some punch in them, you can control things around 60 to 80 to 100 hertz, bring that up, and you're going to get the punch. If you want extension, you're going to have to bring up that 30 hertz or lower area. So you don't always have to just pop everything up and then have it kind of run into 1K. You can really start playing around 80, 100 hertz. Oftentimes is going to give you probably what you want as far as impact goes. Extension, bring up that 30 hertz area. So when I'm doing a bass boost, it's really those maybe into 125, maybe into 125. The other thing is, again, you can cut different frequencies. So if you cut into maybe 300 to 500 hertz, it's going to make the bass more prominent as far as impact goes. Because sometimes that 300, 500 hertz is a little bit boosted, or maybe that speaker is a little bit boosted in that area. It's going to make the speaker sound, again, a little bit veiled in the mid-range, but also a little bit flat in the bass. So if you dip that just a little bit, 2 dB, 3 dB, sometimes that bass impact comes back. So the interesting thing about EQ is it's not always about boosting. Oftentimes it's about cutting. So that's what I would do if you need a little bit more bass in your speakers. Sibilance fix. Sibilance fix. This is one of the most annoying things for me listening, is when I get sibilance and the S's, because once I hear it, I can't unhear it. I like to start at the 4K area, bring that down a little bit. Most of the times though, I also need to cut 2K a little bit. So 2K, 4K, 6K can sometimes all be kind of just a little bit of a pull down right in there. And then listen to something else. Tracks that have a lot of sibilance, Alanis Morissette, King of Pain. The MTV Unplugged record, Alanis Morissette, has a lot of sibilance. Once you hear it, you'll hear it. So I play around with that 4, 6, 8K area, and it tends to at least mitigate a bit of the sibilance issues. And that's about it. Best practices for EQ is to find the curve that you like. And I think this has a little bit more to do with analog EQs. So when you play around and you find the shape that you like, when you find the shape that you like in the EQ, then remember that shape and pull the top of your EQ curve, pull that down to 0. Still maintain the same shape though. So what you're doing is, instead of bringing things above or adding above 0 dB, you're bringing everything down to 0 dB while maintaining the same curve or same shape on the EQ. That is going to minimize the possibility for distortion. There's always going to be possibility for distortion, but when your peaks of your curve are at 0 dB, it reduces the chances for introduced distortion. So let me show you an example on the Lokius. So this is going to be kind of hard to see because it's all silver, and this isn't the traditional type of, you know what? Let me grab a different EQ. So this is a little bit easier to see instead of the Lokius. So this is an old realistic EQ. Still works. Very heavy-handed though. So if you see over here, I have my EQ curve. So this is the shape that I like. So this is the classic kind of W shape that I use. So boosted here in the lower bass, and then it starts to kind of go down, dips a little bit below 1K and then comes back up 1K, dips down a little bit and then comes back up to 0 around 1K. And then if we go down here, it starts to dip again until it starts to rise in the upper, into the treble and the upper treble. So what one would do, it would maintain the same shape, but instead of being above 0 right here, you would push this down to 0, and then you would maintain the shape. So you'd redo it with your peaks on your curve at 0 instead of being above 0. And that's how you can somewhat minimize distortion. In the digital domain, I still think you should do the same thing. Because when we're boosting, we can also cut some of the headroom digitally, which can crush the resolution of the track, which we don't want to do. So when we're doing digital EQ, and this comes from one of my patrons, Martin, who's very smart, keep it somewhat minimal, but also keep it a little bit lower so you're not having to boost that signal, if that makes sense. Because whatever we're manipulating in the digital domain, so fundamentally, your track is no longer bit perfect. So if you want a bit perfect track and you want to do EQ, then you really need to do it in the analog domain. Personally, I don't really care because I can't tell any difference, any degradation of signal. The heavier-handed you are with EQ in the digital domain, though, the more likely that signal is going to start getting crushed. And you can actually kind of tell if you're an Android phone user, there's a built-in EQ in the sound setting. If you start to boost things a lot, you'll hear the overall level of the music drop down. So when we're messing with EQ, we're messing with the headroom in the recording itself digitally. And if I'm wrong, put it in the comments. I'm sure I'm wrong. Anyway, the takeaway here is keep your peaks at 0 dB and then maintain the shape underneath 0 dB. Okay, does that make sense? I hope it does. I hope you enjoyed this. I love EQ, and I think it's a quick and easy way to get the sound that you want out of your speakers and system in general. But it's also a fun way to discover what it is you like. So if you have a pair of very flat speakers, like say the ELAC Unify 2.0, and then you end up with kind of the cam W shape, well, I kind of like a little bit of a V-curve, U-curve type of a speaker. But it's never been easier to EQ things right now, especially with the WiiM Mini. It's not just because they're sponsoring this video, it's because go check out any streamers and see if they have a 10-band EQ included at 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the price. Go check it out because I don't think they exist. It's an easy, cheap way to be able to EQ your music and find out what you like. There are products from Skit, which includes the Loki and the Loki-S. Loki-S is balanced, also has more bands for EQ adjustment. So it's a 6-band versus I think a 4-band for the Loki. I think they're about $150 or around $200 or $300. So also an inexpensive way to start adjusting EQ in the analog domain. If you just want to get your feet wet with EQ, the WiiM Mini is probably the easy answer, especially if you're doing digital music, because you're only going to be EQing things that are streaming. Analog EQ, you EQ everything, depending upon where it's put in the chain. That's another thing. If you've got an EQ, you're going to be putting that between a source, like a preamp, and the power amplifier, right in the middle. Then that's going to affect everything. Anyway, if you have any suggestions for EQ, put them down in the comments, or if I got anything wrong, put it down in the comments. So if you're new here, like the video. If you liked it, subscribe, please. You can always unsubscribe. Links in the comments. Most of those are going to be affiliate links. You can also sign up for Amazon Music, Tidal Music. Sign up for Patreon. We have Patreon-only Zooms, Discord group, Facebook group. Use the thanks button down by the share button. Give me a couple of bucks. Buy me a cup of coffee if you like, but don't feel compelled to buy me anything. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Get yourself an EQ or use an EQ you already have. Start to play around with it and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.